If you have any questions about EPIP, I would love to help answer them or help get you connected to information that can hopefully be helpful. Again, my name's Biz Gormley, and my email is biz@epip.org. Feel free to reach out, and let's talk. We have a bunch of events coming up. First, I'd love to just spotlight our conference, our national annual conference. This year is September 13 to 15. It'll be held in Baltimore, Maryland, and the theme is Elevate Ourselves, Our Work, and Our World. So along those lines, we actually are going to be launching our registration soon, as well as, hold on one second, sorry. Okay, I'm pausing because one of our participants can't hear, so if anyone else is having trouble with the volume, can you just type into the question box? Okay. I know it's kind of silly to ask if you can't hear me for you to do something, but I'm going to assume that because I've only heard from one person that everyone else can hear. So I'm going to move forward. So coming up, as I said, the conference is in the fall, and then we have the registration and the call for submissions for people who want to lead workshop sessions coming up in the next couple weeks. So keep an eye out for emails giving you an alert to the opportunity to register or to share your submissions. And we have a webinar next week, actually a special edition that's designed to help you guys who may be interested in putting together a session submission. It's called Design a Great Session and Present at the EPIP National Conference. And you can sign up for that on our events page, epip.org/events. So check us out online, sign up if you're interested. It's free for members and non-members. And even if you're just thinking about how to maybe put your ideas together or want to just learn in general about how to design a great session, I think this would be a wonderful opportunity to take advantage of. The week after that, we're back to our regular Wednesday webinar schedule, and we're going to be hosting a webinar called Climbing the Career Mountain with Well-Designed Side Projects with guest speaker Matthias Jacobson, and that's on May 11th. Both of these are going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can register for them, as I said before, on our events page at epip.org/events. So, as we just tested out, if you have any technical difficulties or any issues with volume or challenges you're having with the system, please just feel free to type into the question box on your control panel, and I'll do my best to help you troubleshoot. If you have comments or questions that arise throughout the presentation, also please use that question box there to share your feedback and your questions. We're going to have a question and answer session at the end, but if issues or questions come up that are super pertinent to the slides along the way, feel free to type them in there and we'll try and make sure everyone's clear as we move forward through the content. Our polls and question sessions are anonymous, so you can feel free to respond without knowing that your name will not be shared. And if you're following on social media, we'd love for you to use the hashtag EPIP webinar to join the conversation there. We are recording the webinar, so you'll be able to check it out in the archive. And we'd ask that when you finish, you'll receive a post-webinar survey. If you could take a minute just to fill out your feedback, that's super helpful for us as we're putting together the calendar of upcoming content and reflecting on what's most useful for you. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our speakers. They're both going to have a moment to give a little more introduction of themselves, but this is a wonderful opportunity for us to be working with the EPIP DC chapter. So thank you to Kelly, who's the chair of our DC chapter and also works at the Annie Casey Foundation, and Casey Wetzel from the Chesapeake Bay Trust, who is joining us as a guest speaker today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Kelly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Trope, and I'm excited just to say a little bit about our chapter. As chapter of EPIP, EPPC works to strengthen the next generation of grant makers and advance effective social justice philanthropy in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region, which you can see on the screen there. We've got 12 people on our steering committee, one of which is with me today. She helped plan this. So Megan, Logan, thank you so much for helping make this happen. And we've got over 160 chapter members. And if you go to the next slide. So our programming includes discussions, leadership and skill building workshops, and also networking events. We've got some ongoing series this year, which include conversation circles where we discuss different social justice issue each month, and breakfast clubs where guest speakers talk about their work in philanthropy and answer audience questions. We're also really excited for the conference in Baltimore this year. So, do the next slide. And you can find us at EPIPBC on Twitter, or email us at bc@epip.org with any questions or program ideas, or if you just want to set up a chat. We check that pretty frequently. So, our upcoming Breakfast Club is for about international philanthropy, and that's May 5th, 2016. So check the events page at epip.org if you want to sign up for that. I think that's everything for the chapter. So I can also introduce today's presenter, who I'm really excited about. Next slide.
Maybe if you just...
So our next presenter, is Casey Wetzel, Director of Programs for Outreach and Education, Chesapeake Bay Trust. Casey Wetzel joined the Chesapeake Bay Trust in 2007 and now leads the Trust capacity building, community engagement, and environmental education programs. Casey works with funding partners, nonprofit organizations, and community leaders to identify and develop projects that improve both community and environmental well-being. A native of Baltimore, Maryland, Casey graduated from Rollins College with a BA in Environmental Studies and holds an MS in Environmental Science and Policy from Johns Hopkins University and a CPH in Social Marketing from the University of South Florida. Casey has studied water and waste management in the Dominican Republic and environmental sustainability in Costa Rica. Prior to her work at the Chesapeake Bay Trust, she worked as an environmental scientist at SAV Engineers. Casey lives with her husband Doug and her incredibly sweet and often mischievous dogs. In her spare time, she enjoys volunteering as a Maryland master gardener, swimming, biking, hiking, and traveling. Without further ado, Casey, take it away.
Thank you, Kelly, for reading my full bio.
Sorry.
That's okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Casey, and I work at the Chesapeake Bay Trust. As Kelly said, I manage our portfolio that focuses on outreach and education. The Chesapeake Bay Trust, you can go to the next slide, was chartered in 1983, I believe, and we were, I always get the year wrong, by the state legislature. And we were created with the mission of building stewardship in the watershed. So this is our formal mission. The Chesapeake Bay Trust is a nonprofit grant-making organization that's dedicated to improving the Chesapeake Bay Trust and its rivers through environmental education, community outreach, and local watershed restoration. So we focus very much on citizen engagement and increasing stewardship as kind of a guiding value of our work. So, next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So,
sorry. Do you want me to
no, this is
polls, or do you want to wait?
What's that?
Would you like me to get a sense of who's in the audience, or shall we wait?
I think we should do that now, actually. I had asked the folks at EPIP to do a quick poll of who's in the audience, and that way it will help me to understand who it is that we're talking to. So we're going to do just a quick poll of who's in the audience and what type of philanthropic organization you work with.
Great. So everyone, if you can just take a second to choose which of these best describes your employer. We're going to ask 2 quick questions here in our poll. So Go ahead and please select the best match for your employer on this first poll.
Great, that's really helpful. So
All right,
looks
gonna
like
do
we're
about 5 more seconds if people want to finish voting.
okay.
Great. So it looks like these are the results.
That's great. Mostly foundations. Wonderful. That's really helpful for me to understand who we're talking to. I think I can kind of orient a little bit more the conversation on what we as a foundation as well have done related to advancing this framework. So
great. Do you want to talk about issue focus areas as well?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Let's just do that now while we're still polling. So another one of the things we're interested in is understanding what your area of focus is in philanthropy. So if you all could tell me, these are just high-level categories, that would be great.
We know not everything's represented, but whatever is the best fit, we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to type in, if you're in the other category and you'd like to type something into the question box, that's great too. All right, we're going to leave it open about 5 more seconds if people want to vote before we close. Great.
Great. Environment is in the minority. Unfortunately, I do work for an environmental philanthropic organization, but it's good for me to understand we're pretty evenly split across these categories. That's helpful. What were the other folks? Let's see. Write anything in the question box?
It looks like place-based philanthropy, so someone who works on funding smaller organizations in the DC area.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Thank you all.
Great, thanks. I'm going to bring the slides back. Thank you, everybody.
Great. So in 2010, I took over what is the Trust's Stewardship grant program. And we have about 23 grant programs in our portfolio. And the Stewardship program was shortly after that split into what is a restoration-oriented program, implementation mostly of green infrastructure. And the other grant program became solely focused on outreach and community engagement. And at the point at which we were recreating this RFP, I became really interested in what it was that our grantees were doing on the outreach and engagement front, and what their perceptions of that work was, what influenced it. So we were made aware of an opportunity to work with the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources graduate students. And a lot of universities actually offer this. SNRE has a great program where you can actually submit at a certain time in the year. The School of Natural Resources puts out an RFP that allows different entities, nonprofits, and foundations to apply with an idea, a research project that would be relevant to the School of Natural Resources. So we submitted as an organization a proposal to engage a group of 4 graduate students to do an assessment of our grantees' outreach and community engagement work and their perceptions of that work. And their work included in-person interviews, surveys. They did some intercept survey work with our grantees, and then they did assessments of our previous funding for outreach and work. So the outcomes of that work, these are just some highlights. We have, you know, what is a 200-page document from the work. Is that the majority of our grantees seek to motivate individuals to protect the Bay, which is consistent with our mission, which is great, 97%. And a significant portion of that, 62% of those folks, also are seeking to influence behavioral change. Some of the organizations that were assessed are already using social science tools, and I'm sure a lot of the folks on the call are familiar with what are considered to be social science tools, specifically using storytelling, prompts, normative behavior, social diffusion, public commitment statements. Those things are considered social science tools, and some of them are using tools like that in isolation. But most of the groups that were assessed we're applying those tools separately of a social science framework like community-based participatory research or social marketing. And most of the programs that were assessed were designed strictly to increase knowledge and not in any way to influence behavioral change, which was very concerning. And what was one of the reasons we had wanted to do this work was we had hypothesized that that might be the case, that there was a high percentage of folks looking to influence behavior, but that most of the programs are being designed with awareness or knowledge strategies. And that within our grantee community, there were pervasive misconceptions about behavioral change frameworks. So, next slide. So we got a document at the end of 2012 from the graduate students that made recommendations to the trust about what we could do to help our grantees to better influence behavior, given that was one of their goals. And we also received something called a rapid assessment for outreach programs that we've since augmented that allows people that have an existing program that may not want to start from scratch to assess where their areas of weakness are in their program. The document for the guide for research best practices recommended to the trust that we focus on addressing behavior change misconceptions, that we offer more opportunities to learn within our grantee community, that we provide technical assistance when possible, and that we encourage collaboration across our grantees. So I'll speak more to how we kind of touched on each of those things in the next few slides. So next slide. So this is one of the major misconceptions that we deal with, that knowledge will lead to behavioral change. So I always like to read this quote verbatim because I think it's fairly powerful. While increasing knowledge or concern about the environment are worthy goals, studies have shown that being knowledgeable and or concerned about environmental issues does not necessarily lead to action. So social science frameworks were born out of the public health school in the 70s, and there's now 30+ years of research that backs up this statement, that increasing knowledge or concern does not necessarily lead to action. Unfortunately, what we're learning is that a great deal of the work that is designed to influence behavior is not actually designed to influence behavior. It's really only working to influence awareness. So moving forward in the slide, thank you. So what does that mean for us? So as a community, and I'm speaking from an environmental perspective, since I'm a mostly environmental philanthropic organization, we were starting to consider, well, what is it that we are accomplishing or have been accomplishing in the last 30 years of our work? And we came across this framework. Hopefully a lot of you are familiar with it. It actually works in a lot of different sectors. It's Everett Rogers' Diffusions of Innovations Curve. And actually it's been augmented by a number of people over the years. In this case, this is a kind of different take on it, done by Nancy Lee, who's a pretty famous social marketer on the West Coast. And this is, she calls them the show me, help me, make me columns of the Diffusions Innovations Curve. So you have what are considered your innovators and early adopters, and then that's that green section of the slide on the front, and it shows a maximum of 16% of people that could potentially change their behavior based on information alone. And so we consider them the show me group. And then you can see this kind of orange section on the back end of the innovation curve, and it's another 16%, which are considered laggards, and we call them the make me group. And the best way to influence them is often regulation and legal interventions. But we have a huge chunk in the middle, which we consider to be the help me group. And that is a group that actually needs more than education, but probably less than regulation. So next slide. So what have we been doing? As a foundation, we had really only been getting to the show me group. Based on the outcomes of that research from the graduate students, we learned that most of the work that we've been doing was influencing knowledge and awareness, meaning we were getting to that maximum of 16% of people who may change their behavior based on information alone. And to the extent that other foundations in the area were doing advocacy work to influence policy, they were getting to the Make Me group. When we would be able to pass policy or regulation, we would reach the laggards. But we had been missing this huge section in the populace in the middle that we hadn't been designing programs to influence. And that's where social marketing and behavioral change frameworks become very important. It's providing people more than just information in order to influence what it is that they do in their daily lives. So this for us kind of was the cornerstone of changing the way that we were funding in order to better support our grantees' ability to influence behavior and influence what is the bulk of the populace, that middle section. So next slide. So we understood after thinking about our formative research that our grantees were underestimating the difficulty of changing behavior, and so were we. We understood that the time it takes to change behavior was being underestimated as well. We had been using ineffective models. We had been funding ineffective models. Our grantees have been creating programs that kind of lacked evaluation. Now, we required evaluation? Yes, but was it the right evaluation? Not necessarily. And we were coming to learn that as we became more familiar with behavioral change frameworks. And we're also seeing our grantees mostly propose output-based measurement as opposed to outcome-based measurement, even though we were constantly trying to push them towards outcome and impact measurements. Frequently, what was being evaluated was output-based. And we wanted to encourage our grantees and ask ourselves if we're actually changing behavior, if we're changing resource use, and if we're changing the quality of the resource. In our case, when we say the resource, we're talking about the health of the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. One of the things that I'll kind of pause and say here is that, pilot programs, and oftentimes our grantees were only capable of starting what is a pilot behavioral change campaign, we learned, were too small to actually see change in resource quality. So change in water quality on a measurable scale. So, and this is common in most social science framework application, encouraging people to measure the actual behavioral adoption is something that we've focused on because it allows for an attribution of a certain impact to an individual behavioral adoption as opposed to measuring the impact itself. So I can speak more to that later if anyone has any questions. But all right, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so what is social marketing? This is the definition, and there's a ton of definitions, just so you know, but it's a process that applies marketing principles and techniques to influence your target audience's behaviors, and that benefits society as well as the target audience. So in traditional marketing, you're not benefiting society, right? You're applying marketing principles to improve your bottom line, right? In social marketing, you're influencing what is best for society, the public good, the commonwealth, right? What's best for society. So those are the key differences. There's lots actually more differences, but they all sort of boil down to that same point, which is that it's not really a for-profit effort. Okay, next slide. So I'll say this, I do 3-day trainings on social marketing. That's not what the intent of this presentation is for, but I have provided you with the 10-step process that was emailed to you earlier. The planning process is above, and then you can walk through what is the creation of your campaign. And this one-pager should help walk you through those 10 steps. I'm always a fan of talking about this 10-step process. I'm going to just do a quick overview of what it is, and then I'm going to talk to you about the strategies that the Trust has been employing in order to help our grantees actually understand this framework and apply this framework.
I'm just going to interrupt you super quickly so that people know. If you look on your control panel, there's a handout section, and the documents are in there. So if you want to follow along, you can feel free to download that document there.
Great. Thank you. Great. So background, purpose, and focus. This is basically a really important step in the 10-step process that allows people to think about why it is that they're doing what they're doing, how they've come to the focus that they're taking to address their issue. So, you know, people frequently want to skip this step. They think that they have a very clear understanding of why they've chosen the focus that they're taking. But that this process can actually change completely why you might place your significant limited time and resources in one direction versus another. So, for instance, in our world, in the water quality world, you may know that there's certain types of pollutants influencing water quality. But if you do an actual return on investment assessment, you can identify that there's certain types of behaviors that would influence particular pollutants more than others. And then there's certain types of strategies within those, you know, those behaviors that you could actually have greater influence on as well. So this background, purpose, and focus allows you to consider why, not just why you're taking a certain direction, but where you might get the highest return on investment. Next, you would sort of analyze your situation. This is your typical SWOT process, which is your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths and weaknesses are usually an internal look at an organization to identify areas of potential weakness or strength, obviously, not to be redundant, but weaknesses, for example, might be if you've determined that you may want to work with a particular community of color, but you don't have somebody on staff that speaks the appropriate language, that would be considered an internal weakness, for instance, and would help you moving forward to consider how you're going to address that weakness through partnerships, through hiring someone to make sure that your campaign makes sense, or if that you're even the right messenger for this work. Opportunities and threats are an external look at your organization's, you know, external influences to the work that you're about to undertake. So the next step would be to select a target audience. And this can be, you know, really fairly challenging to do, but there's lots of different ways to break down an audience and subsegment them by geographics, demographics, sociographics. But most often we see our grantees breaking down their target audience and focusing on a particular audience based on existing behavioral adoption, so their penetration rate of an existing behavior that they've chosen to focus on, and the geographics, basically where those people are in the world. Those seem to be the most sensible, particularly for smaller resource nonprofits. Next, you would determine your behavioral objectives and goals, and that means further refining relative to your audience the behavioral focus that you've taken, and considering that relative to the subsegments that you've identified within your target audience. The cornerstone of really any behavioral change framework, community-based participatory research, or social marketing is understanding your audience. The difference between those two frameworks that I just mentioned is that social marketing is sometimes perceived as a bit more top-down, meaning that you're researching your audience and doing interviews, focus groups, survey work. And in community-based participatory research, you're usually engaging with a representative sample of your audience throughout the process where they help to create their own behavioral change campaign. There's a big movement now in social marketing to really move in that direction so that it's not so traditionally rooted in the research of an audience and designing something without continuing to check in with them. Next, you would develop a positioning statement. This is usually a guiding statement that allows you to keep your ship moving in the right direction internally based on what it is that you've identified through understanding your audience. So when you do formative research through the process of understanding your audience, you're identifying barriers and benefit research. Barrier and benefit research just basically means what is it that your audience knows, what their attitudes are, what their current practices are, and what they believe is preventing them from doing a particular behavior, and what they think is good about it. And when you have a pretty intimate understanding of what your audience knows, believes, and feels that they need in order to do something differently, you can then start to shape a campaign that gives them those things. that provides them products and services. So after you've developed that positioning statement that guides your work moving forward, you would move into what is the heart of a marketing campaign, which is the 4 Ps. And if anyone's ever done any marketing classes, you'll be very familiar with this. This is the product, the price, the place, and the promotion. And promotion is last for a reason, because most people want to do it first. And it's actually, as we discussed earlier, the thing that actually can have the least influence over your audience. It's frequent that they need innovative products and services. They need pricing strategies that make things not just financial, but also non-monetary incentives that make things enticing to them. They need placement strategies that make things very convenient for them. And then they need to be made aware of those offerings through promotional strategies that are oriented towards messages that resonate with your audience. And all of those things together can make a very successful campaign as long as they're, audience oriented and based in tackling some of the barriers and benefits you previously identified. Finally, and you guys should all be very familiar with this, as folks within foundations, you would determine an evaluation plan, you set a budget, and folks would find funding and write an implementation plan and come to you all with a campaign once they've walked through this process. And so that's pretty much the 10-step process. You can spend, months learning about any one of these things, but we'll move on. And I'll start talking about how it is that we've started to institutionalize this in our grant making. Next slide, thank you. Great, so it's interesting. This is very meta, but we are thinking of how we market social marketing, right? How are we applying social marketing to change the behavior of our grantees? So when we think about what our product, price, place, and promotion is for advancing the adoption of social marketing by our grantees, we considered the recommendations of the graduate students from the School of Natural Resources and decided to provide trainings for our grantees right away. At this point, we've done upwards of 50 trainings for a variety of different group sizes. We've created a technical assistance provider network, so we hired contractually Nancy Lee to come in and train 19 technical assistance providers in the Chesapeake region as part of our capacity building initiative. And those 19 individuals have contributed to providing trainings for grantees. So I myself have probably only given 20 or 30 over the years. The remainder have been done by the technical assistance providers that we created. So those 19 people applied and were accepted. And the criteria for selecting those folks was that they were willing to go outside of their organizations to help others in learning about the social marketing process. And the certificate they received allowed them to kind of, while it's not a credential necessarily, market themselves as someone that has a little bit more expertise in the area of social science application. And they were tasked with providing a minimum of 2 or 3 presentations to others on this framework, which allowed it to sort of diffuse into our grantee community. They're also listed on our website and some of the other funders' websites that we frequently work with to direct folks to these 19 individuals. We developed an audit tool. It's not finalized yet. We're still working on it. It was based on the rapid assessment that the graduate students made. We were a little unhappy with the assessment tool. The rapid assessment tool is great, but it was a little bit too focused on just the application of individual social science tools. So we've since augmented it to help people identify other areas of weakness in their process, considering, for instance, the 4 Ps. So for us, obviously, our price strategy for our grantees is funding. We aligned our RFP with the 10 steps, and I'll speak a little bit more about our funding in a minute. And for our placement, we created a case study database. I'll speak about that too. And we created something called baysurvey.org. And for our promotion strategies, we have been working very hard with what is the federal system that supports the Bay Agreement. It's called the Chesapeake Bay Program in this area, to include a stewardship goal in the Bay Agreement, which was recently passed about a year ago now, which was a very big deal for this region in allowing federal funding to support stewardship efforts. And we do online webcasts just like this and conference sessions to promote social marketing. We can move forward to the next slide. Great. So this is an example of one of the technical assistance providers giving a presentation on social marketing. This is a product and a service that we're providing to our grantee community. This was a day-long training. We usually offer them as day-long trainings on the weekends. And we trained, this is one of our Sea Grant specialists that we trained, who holds trainings like this once every month or so. In this case, we trained, I think, 30 individuals this day on social marketing, and went into specifics on how to conduct formative research. So, next slide. So this is our list of technical assistance providers. Again, like I said earlier, we post their names on our website. We have funding partners that also promote them. And when we have folks that are looking to apply to our RFP to do any type of outreach or behavioral change work, we recommend, depending on where they are, that they reach out to the technical assistance provider closest to them to consider how they can better incorporate social science best practices into their program. So next slide. The Audit Tool. So the Audit Tool is not finalized yet. We're still piloting it, but we had a session about 6 months ago. We got really great feedback on it. It allows, this is just a snapshot of the tool, but it allows folks with existing outreach programs to score their existing program based on a series of criteria. And depending on their overall score, it gives them recommendations on where their areas of weakness are and what information they should pursue in order to improve that component of their program. We're still refining it based on feedback, but this is becoming a really highly sought after tool, so we're going to have to finish this soon for folks. To be done soon. All right, next slide. Right, so aligning our RFP. This was the big driver for us, and honestly, we did this first. So if I'm being clear about the chronology, and I don't know, I'd love to hear folks' thoughts at the end of this, but for us, one of the biggest ways that we can influence behavior change is by just changing our RFP and asking folks to propose things in a certain way and to consider designing their programs in a certain way, and if they do that, then we're more likely to fund them. So we revised our RFP pretty quickly early on, knowing that it was well in advance of our grantees' understanding of this framework. And so, it's gotten better over the years, and we've had this RFP now. We're in the 4th year. We did it in 2011, 2012. So we're entering into the 5th year of the framework that we have in our RFP. We allow, initially we had done 3 years. We're going to have 3 years of funding for behavior change work, where the first year would be formative research. The second year would be planning and design of a campaign based on that research, and the third year would be actually implementation of a pilot campaign. We received feedback in year 2 we had created barriers in our system, that a 3-year process and commitment for some of these nonprofits was challenging for a variety of reasons. And so also just having them have to apply over and over again over a 3-year period so we can continue to check in on them felt cumbersome to them. So we switched it in year 2 and went to a 2-year process where they could receive more funding, so $50,000 in year 1 to do formative research and planning to create a actual campaign plan. So at the end of year 1, they had done their formative research and they had created the plan, and that's worked very well. And then in year 2, they come back for another $50,000 to pilot some of the interventions that they've created as part of that campaign to influence behavior. And I don't anticipate us changing that. That's working really well for us right now. And the RFP has worked as a really great incentive, financial incentive for folks to move in this direction. Next slide. So this is something that's also going to be finalized by the end of the summer, hopefully with the support of an intern. We've created a case study database. So as you remember, it's one of the recommendations that the graduate students made for us was that we create a space for folks to share information with each other and create more collaboration among our grantees. Because there was a lot of folks that were concerned that, you know, when speaking to the graduate students, that they knew that other NGOs in the area were doing things that were similar and they weren't learning from each other. This actually was great because the trust had been concerned about that as well. We had no public face for sharing what came of our funding. So we're in the process. We've created this website now called our Chesapeake Bay Outreach Campaign Database that's going to be crowdsourced and allow people to upload the outcomes of their behavioral change campaigns to the system. People will be able to look at the outreach campaigns by behavior or by audience or by region. And for the trust, we'll be able to track barrier and benefit research by behavior and audience over time to identify tipping points and better understand when we've reached a point in certain behavioral change efforts, like for instance, rain garden adoption, when we know the point at which we're, all the barriers and benefits informative research has been identified, and really just prioritization work should be happening within target audiences. This tool will allow us to track that over time. It'll also allow our grantees to better learn from each other about what is working and what is not working. They'll also be able to share resources. So if they create a particularly good campaign logo or message, or they have a survey they want to share with each other, they'll be able to upload those things and share them with each other. So folks won't have to recreate the wheel. Also, baysurvey.org, so that was the campaign database on the top left. Baysurvey.org on the bottom right is a local tool that allows for an NGO to understand who is doing what in their area. So it's a pre-made survey that anyone can do on an iPad in their community that asks people about common behaviors that we frequently, as the Bay community, look to influence. And folks can apply this in the community and find out how many folks are currently doing or not doing the behaviors that I might want to influence, and what is the likelihood, their self-reported likelihood, that they would adopt those behaviors in the future. Behavior selection is something I'll chat about a little bit later. It's something that we're working with people to really consider more strongly based on research. So next slide. So as I said earlier, we worked very closely with the Bay Program to include a stewardship goal in the Bay Agreement. So the Chesapeake Bay Program is a regional partnership that directs and conducts the restoration of Chesapeake Bay, the Chesapeake Bay work in the US, and the Chesapeake Bay Agreement of the Bay Program guides the restoration of the nation's largest estuary. So it has a bunch of goals in it. I think it has 10 goals, and for a long time, it had only had goals that are specifically oriented towards restoration, like improving buffer plantings or submerged aquatic vegetation, or reducing certain levels of pollutants and water quality, or toxics. Actually, toxics is new, but most of the goals within the Bay Agreement were very oriented towards restoration. And they were missing what is the human element of the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay. So this was a big push for us, and getting this goal into the Bay Agreement actually freed up federal funding to support stewardship work, which we find very important. And that's actually supported some of the work that we're doing now that I've told you about. Next slide. So some challenges that we continue to tackle as a foundation. So obviously, I said earlier, there's a lot of misconceptions about what it takes to change behavior. There's a lot of people that still very strongly believe that information-intensive programs will work. That and even people that have been trained, they need to be this needs to be reiterated for them. There's something very deeply ingrained in people that if you know something, you will do something differently. But we know that's not true. I mean, we have PhDs that know all the reasons why they should get outside and run and be healthy. They may be you know, that may be their area of expertise, that may be why they got their PhD in the first place, and they don't do it. We should be making it easier for them, providing products and services and incentive strategies and convenience strategies in order to help them do it. Knowledge, even at the pinnacle of knowledge, is not always going to be, you know, the thing that moves us. People also genuinely believe that economic self-interest is like the silver bullet, and that's all that people need. But as we've been talking about, it's just one tool in our tool belt, a pricing strategy. So if you just do price or you just do promotion, those are misconceptions. That's just one component. You have one leg of a four-leg stool, and you're missing the other three. And the idea that you could do information-intensive programs or economic self-interest programs without providing any other resources to a population and move the needle, it's false. And there's a lot of data to prove that. And then we have the culture of doing. This is an internal term in our office, but it's one that we find fascinating. Our grantees are they're used to working on a shoestring budget. They're used to getting things done quickly, and getting our grantees to take a step back and actually research their audiences and understand them, to believe that they don't understand them, to recognize that they can't guess what it is that their audiences believe or think, has been a challenge. There's a lot of folks that just want to get out there and do it, and getting folks to actually be comfortable with social science and take time with their audiences has been a bit of a hurdle. But I think that people are getting on board with that. There's also been some misconceptions about social marketing as a silver bullet framework. So as we've worked to get this into the water in our community, no pun intended, I've started to experience, I think a lot of the technical assistance providers have started to experience people using the term incorrectly, and people believing that it's, you know, it's sort of the mecca, that everyone that starts doing social marketing will be effective at what it is that they want to do. That's actually not the case, as you might imagine. If you want people to donate to your organization, there's lots of existing frameworks for fundraising and development that are much better suited to influencing fundraising, to influencing folks donating to your organization. Social marketing isn't well suited for that, and there's better oriented frameworks. If you're looking to get people to you know, vote differently, are social science tools applicable? Absolutely. But there's great community organizing frameworks that are better suited towards that model. Informed behavior selection, earlier I mentioned that you know, folks are selecting behaviors, but they're not really considering why. For a long time now, we've noticed that folks will say, okay, I'm gonna work on getting folks to plant trees in my community, but they're not really sure why that's the case. We had a circumstance on the Eastern Shore where we had an applicant that said they were going to try to get folks to reduce fertilizing on their property, and they hadn't really considered the current penetration rate, meaning the current adoption rate of that behavior. And so, you know, they went out, they started to do some work, they started getting public commitment statements, and it turns out that everyone was really willing to commit to not fertilizing because they weren't fertilizing to begin with. They didn't know the penetration rate of that behavior. So making sure that you're always considering penetration rate, the actual level of adoption of a behavior, the potential impact of an individual adoption of that behavior, and the likelihood that people would adopt in the future, multiplying those is an actual equation that allows you to weight behaviors. And it's fairly important to get our grantees to consider all three of those at once. Finally, we have, I skipped one, sorry, contractual availability of social marketers. So this is a pretty simple one. There's not a lot of social marketers out there. There's marketers that are very well versed in the 4 Ps, and they'll sound like they know what they're doing, but they're very focused on what is traditional marketing, influencing point of sale purchase, right? When it comes down to it, applying what is the 10-step process or community-based participatory research, doing that understanding of your audience, that is not what marketers do, and they become uncomfortable with what it is that you're asking them to do. But they sell themselves that way And so I've had a little bit of trouble with the fact that contractually there's not a lot of social marketers available for our grantees to hire if they choose to do that. But there are some in this area. And then there's, like I said, there's some discomfort with formative research. We're trying to lift folks up there as well, doing interviews, doing intercept surveys, doing focus groups, creating groups of people that would weigh in on your program design. Those things are areas of discomfort for our grantees right now, and we're still working to make them more comfortable with that process. So, next slide. This is my last slide. So this is just an example of some campaigns that we've done. We've had some really creative campaigns in the last few years. They're getting more sophisticated, and it's really exciting for us to see that happen and to see that application of this work. The top photo, it's too small for you to read it, I apologize, but had a really great campaign associated with it. They did great formative research in a highly urbanized area in Baltimore City to understand why folks were opposed to having trees planted in front of their home, why they wouldn't maintain them. They actually had initially wanted folks to plant trees. By doing the appropriate background, purpose, and focus work and understanding their audience, they came to the conclusion that their initial behavioral selection was inappropriate and that the trees should be planted and they should be focusing on getting the folks to maintain the tree. But that trees should be planted for the folks because they had other more pressing social priorities in those areas, and trying to influence tree planting behavior was not appropriate. So kind of right from the start, they had really pivotal changes in what was their initial campaign. But they influenced behavior significantly here. They had zero mortality of trees at the end of 3 years because everyone was maintaining their trees. Their product, price, place, and promotion were really interesting. They partnered with a local university art group that created custom-made images of the tree in front of your home that would hang in a frame in your house so that it wouldn't be thrown out. And it served as a reminder to the folks that that was their tree. It was, print 369 of 1,000. And it would remind them to water their tree, but it was also a beautiful piece of art. So it was one of the most sophisticated prompts I'd ever seen. They had tree birthday parties. And all of these things, they sound like silly promotional elements, but each one of them was designed to address a particular issue. The tree menu, for instance, was designed to address barriers. So folks would be able to pick their particular tree based on concerns about roots or leaves. Depending on your concern about trees, you were then on a choose your own adventure to pick your own tree, which created buy-in in the community that they were picking a tree that they were going to be more comfortable with. Just as an example. So they institutionalized their barrier and benefit research into their campaign design. So that's it for me. I'm gonna stop here and I'll open it up for questions.
So much. I just learned a ton and I appreciate it. I hope others also got a lot of value. There were some questions about the access to the slides. So in addition to the handouts that will be available again to you in the control panel now, they will also be emailed to you. And then the slides and recording will all be online. I would love to take this time to open up the floor for questions. If anyone has any questions about the case studies and examples that Casey shared, or the framework, or places to get more resources, anything like that, would love to have you share your questions in the question box. We do have someone who's cheering, so thank you, Casey. It says, fantastic topic, thank you for sharing. And definitely a lot of enthusiasm in that comment, so thank you. I'm curious, you were talking, as people are typing in their questions, you were talking a bit about the difference in expertise between regular marketers and social marketers. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about if someone has marketing training and seeks to be doing this social marketing, ways for them to access resources, whether it's through you guys and the sessions you're planning, or schools or archives or anywhere online that you think would be good for them to check out? What do you recommend for people who are interested to deepen their knowledge on social marketing?
Sure. Well, I feel like you asked two questions. I'll answer the last one first because I think it's relevant to everyone. So I started learning about this by going to training by Douglas Mackenzie Moore, who has a version of social marketing called community-based social marketing. It's oriented towards environmentally responsible behavior. So I think only 6% of the folks on the call were environmental foundations, but the community-based social marketing is still an interesting version of the social marketing framework, even if you're not looking to influence environmentally responsible behaviors. He's based in Canada, and I've done 2 of his trainings. He has like a 101, and then he has a 3-day advanced course that you can go up and take. And he travels around he travels around the world, but he holds a lot of his trainings in Toronto and Nova Scotia. Shortly after that, I did some coursework. There's a great course through Duke University online, environmental communication. It has a component of it that focuses on social marketing. But, there's a great website called Tools for Change. I think I sent that link to you all in the email. Jay Cassirer, I always say his name wrong, is wonderful. You can look into somebody named Craig Lefebvre, who is a wonderful kind of thought leader in social science framework application. And then, of course, Nancy Lee, one of the kind of lead authors of the 10-step process that we've decided to focus on because we think it's fairly discrete and descriptive, is a great resource as well. And their books are out there. Their stuff is all out on the web. You can download it if you just simply Google search any of them. But your first question was if you're a marketer looking to better learn about those things. Obviously, everything I just told you stands for a for-profit or contractual group that's looking to become an actual social marketer. I'll say this, when we did our technical assistance provider network training, we trained 2 for-profit groups as well. We were very on the fence about doing that initially. We thought we'd only train nonprofit representatives, but it turned out to be one of the best things that we did because those 2 individuals that had for-profit groups have ended up carrying forward this framework far more than any of the nonprofit participants has done. So we will likely be doing a second behavioral change framework training, and we'll certainly augment it, and we may tailor it to a different audience, but I'll definitely be keeping in mind the issue of contractual deficiency.
Thanks. We have another question. Are there guideline materials recreating effective evaluation programs, understanding that there are different frames depending on context?
I want to look at this question. I can't expand this box for some reason. Can you repeat it one more time? It's for whatever reason. Oh wait, I think I can see it. Are there guideline materials?
Yeah.
Effective evaluation programs, understanding there are different frames depending on context, right? Yes. So there are guidelines for creating effective evaluation programs. So what I can tell you on the call, and you guys maybe know this, so forgive me if I'm saying something you already know, but there's a continuum of evaluation. You can evaluate inputs, outputs, outcomes, impact, and then there's obviously sort of the gold standard, which is getting people to evaluate return on investment. We've determined that that's asking quite a bit from our grantees, and just asking them to think mostly about outcomes has been really helpful. We're trying very much to influence our grantees to report on failure as much as success, because the things that don't work, particularly in behavioral change, are just as interesting as things that do work. In designing evaluation programs for behavior change, the best thing that you can do is observation, right? If you can actually observe a behavior, then that's the most real version of evaluation for behavioral adoption. However, we know that most behaviors that we might look to influence don't happen in the public eye. They're not easily observable. in which case the only thing that you have is self-reporting. And there's lots of different ways to collect that information. And there's lots of best practices around how to do that well so that you're not getting biased responses or people aren't trying to respond to you and give you what it is that they think you want to hear. But evaluation should be also multifaceted in order to, gain a data set that's statistically significant and you can feel is reliable representation of whether or not you've moved the needle on behavioral adoption.
Great, thanks. One more question. Can you speak a little bit more about prioritizing or weighting behaviors?
Sure. So I said what the formula was earlier, so let me just repeat that really fast because I think that that's really important. So what we experienced was that some folks were saying, okay, well, I picked this behavior because I think that folks are really interested in it or they're really likely to do it. Or I picked this behavior because I know that rain gardens are buyer attention. If I could get all the homeowners in the area to put rain gardens on their property, it would be great because it would be really high impact to the watershed, right? Or I picked this behavior because I think that no one's doing it, and that's why, right? But any one of those things in isolation is not really enough, right? You have to be able to multiply all three of those things, and that'll help you to determine what behavior you should tackle. So in making a list of all the behaviors that might affect your end goal, whatever that may be, then you would consider each of those behaviors potential impact to that end goal, and you can provide a 1 to 10 evaluation of that impact, right? You can assess penetration rate, and so baysurvey.org allows folks to do this. We're actually going to create an index. I didn't really want to talk about this too much on the call, but we're doing this at a larger scale so folks won't have to do too much of this, and assessing penetration rate. We'll have data for it, for the known behaviors we're looking to influence as a community. But basically, penetration rate is the inverse. So if you know that 90% of people are already doing a behavior, that means that there's only 10% of people that you might influence to do that behavior, right? So you would take the inverse number. You would take that 10% multiplied by, say, that behavior, you rate that as an 8, right? But you have this low, you're multiplying it by a low penetration. You want what is a high or a low penetration rate, meaning if you have 90%, you have a high penetration rate. So you're only going to be able to move the needle for about 10% of the population. And you're going to multiply that score by the impact, by the likelihood that someone would do something. And likelihood is something that you have to have folks qualitatively assess through formative research, but that can influence what you do. And you can have experts weigh in on this if you haven't done formative research in advance to say, what is the likelihood? You can poll people quite quickly around you. What is the likelihood that you do this if you're not doing it now on, a Likert scale, like a 5 or 7 point Likert scale? And that'll give you a number that you can then plug into that formula. And those three things, if you do that for all your list of behaviors, it's actually going to allow you to weight those behaviors. And you'll be able to identify the ones where you should place your limited time and resources and really try to move the needle on that, because that's where you're going to get your most impact, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it was interesting, but I'm taking notes. It was helpful. Thank you. Great. I know we're up against the hour now, so I just want to thank the entire DC chapter, Megan especially, Kelly, Storm, I know was a helpful part in pulling this together. And thank you so much, Casey, for your expertise, for all the resources and information you've provided, and for making yourself available for questions. If folks have questions, follow up biz@epip.org, and I'll do my best to help you get in touch with the folks who are part of this webinar and or answer your questions about EPIP. And I welcome you all to come back next week. Thank you so much, Casey.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.